Οι πόλεις αποτελούν θέατρο αλλαγών και καινοτομιών, έδρες εξουσίας και σταυροδρόμια γνώσης.
Cities are the future of humanity.
Μέχρι το 2050, το 68% του πληθυσμού του πλανήτη θα ζει σε πόλεις οι οποίες ήδη βρίσκονται στα όρια τους ή θα μετακινηθεί σε άλλες που δεν έχουν ακόμα σχεδιαστεί. Ποτέ πριν δεν ήταν τόσο επιτακτική ανάγκη να δημιουργηθούν βιώσιμες πόλεις που να εμπνέουν και να ενθουσιάζουν κατοίκους και επισκέπτες.
This is the media capital of the world, the cultural capital of the world, the financial capital of the world. When things happen here, it gets noticed and it matters.
Infrastructure, housing, public open space.
Roads and trains and water and power.
Art and culture and things that move our soul.
We're going to have a planet of 10 billion people. To me, the question is, how do we do that in a way that lives in harmony with the resources of the planet, creates social equity, creates opportunity?
Καθώς κινούμαστε ολοταχώς προς ένα περισσότερο αστικό μέλλον, είναι πολλά αυτά που έχουμε να μάθουμε από το παρόν και το παρελθόν, για το σήμερα και για τον τρόπο που μπορούμε να χτίσουμε τις καλύτερες πόλεις.
New York City is a place for everyone.
Most people think of New York as this giant city of 8 to 9 million people. But for those of us who live here, we have our communities and our neighborhoods, and it really gives a sense of belonging in this giant, chaotic urban center.
People think of New York as this sort of cold, brash, businessy kind of place, but there simultaneously are like 1,000 acts of kindness every day. There's this sense that we're all in it together. It feels like a miracle.
Yeah, we're a little brusque, but most New Yorkers will help someone in need, but just don't get in our way. If you're coming out of the subway, don't stop at the top of the stairs to look at your phone. Don't walk 4 people across the sidewalk. We will cut through you like a battleship going through butter.
Αυτή είναι η Νέα Υόρκη, που έχει γίνει και τραγούδι. Η επωνομαζόμενη πρωτεύουσα του κόσμου, με περισσότερους από 8 εκατομμύρια κατοίκους. Σχεδόν το 1 εκατομμύριο από αυτούς είναι εκατομμυριούχοι.
New York is perhaps the premier global city. It's a kind of a symbol, as a beacon of what a capitalist market-based society can achieve.
Κέντρο το Μανχάταν, ειδικά η Wall Street, σφίζει από ζωή. Μια παγκόσμια κυψέλη επιχειρήσεων, εμπορικών, τραπεζικών και οικονομικών συναλλαγών για περισσότερο από 200 χρόνια. Προσελκύει επενδυτές και επιχειρηματίες όπως το μέλι τραβάει τις μέλισσες.
Wall Street is constantly innovating, constantly coming up with new ways to provide money, to provide liquidity. It's the grease that lubricates the American economy.
Δεν χρειάζεται να αναφερθεί ότι το κυνήγι του κέρδους εδώ έχει πολύ υψηλό τίμημα.
Nothing is a more visible symbol of the striver's success than the skyline itself.
Το κόστος ζωής στο Μανχάταν ήταν κατά 148% υψηλότερο από τον μέσο όρο σε εθνικό επίπεδο. Για την αγορά ενός σπιτιού εδώ, το κόστος υπερβαίνει τα 3.600 ευρώ το τετραγωνικό μέτρο. Και όσο για τα πενταψήφια νούμερα των χρεών σε πιστωτικές κάρτες, είναι ένα βάρος που μόνο 1 στους 5 εργαζόμενους στη Νέα Υόρκη μπορεί να αντέξει. Για να παραφράσουμε λίγο τον Όσκαρ Wilde, όποιος καταφέρει να ζήσει με όσα έχει στη Νέα Υόρκη, υποφέρει από έλλειψη φαντασίας.
Manhattan, sitting at the head of New York Bay, corseted by 2 rivers. Ships as big as its buildings berth here.
Η πόλη οφείλει κατά ένα μεγάλο μέρος στην επιτυχία της στην τοποθεσία της, στις εκβολές του ποταμού Χάτσον.
New York City is here because of its harbor, first and foremost. And so that meant that we were a place of trade and commerce.
Manhattan became the business hub because that's where the port was. The original seaport was down near the South Street seaport at the foot of Broad Street.
To understand the early history of New York, you have to understand that it was first called New Amsterdam. That created a trading post in Lower Manhattan in the 1620s.
Wall Street during the Dutch period was actually literally there was a wall. The lower tip of Manhattan was essentially a kind of a medieval city protecting the Dutch.
Η αποικία ιδρύθηκε από την περίφημη Ολλανδική εταιρεία Δυτικών Ινδιών. Την πρώτη πολυεθνική εταιρεία που η αξία της με σημερινά δεδομένα ανερχόταν στα 3 τρισεκατομμύρια δολάρια. Περίπου το διπλάσιο της αξίας των Apple, Amazon και Microsoft μαζί σήμερα. Αυτοί οι ευφύς βασιλιάδες του εμπορίου έβαλαν έτσι τα θεμέλια του καπιταλισμού, ο οποίος κατά μία έννοια οδήγησε στη γέννηση του σύγχρονου παγκοσμιοποιημένου κόσμου.
The Dutch viewed diversity as the key to profit. By 1640, there are approximately 700 souls living in the colony. They're worshipping 13 religions, and they're speaking 18 languages. If you want to make money, you diversify. Diversity equals commerce. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, but commerce is the god of Manhattan.
Τίποτα δεν μπορεί να επιταχύνει την κατασκευή μιας πόλης περισσότερο από τη λατρεία του χρήματος.
Economic success brings more people, which generates more economic success. And if you look at the lower tip of Manhattan, after the Civil War, it was a magnet for railroad, shipping lines, stock, bonds, trading, law firms, printing presses, newspapers. The corporations need to be near the finance people, the factories need to be near the port, the rail lines, and the shipping. They want to be near the seat of government, so they can have some sort of say over policy. They were drawn together. They needed to be together. To succeed in business requires you to be part of this really thick web of markets.
New York's the world's largest financial center. In America, they call it the Big Apple.
In 1811, the state, actually working with the city, decided that they needed a plan to encourage people to get beyond that because it was getting so crowded. And so what they did was they came up with this idea of a rectilinear grid for the entire island of Manhattan up to 155th Street.
Για το σχεδιασμό του Μανχάταν, περιοχή τότε καθαρά αγροτική, έπρεπε να σκαφτεί μια έκταση 2.028 οικοδομικών τετραγώνων, μια δουλειά που χρειάστηκε δεκαετίες για να ολοκληρωθεί.
The grid is designed to systematize New York.
Το σχέδιο ήταν βασισμένο σε ένα μοτίβο που προτίμησαν στρατιές κατασκευαστών από την αρχαιότητα.
Manhattan was swampy, Manhattan was rocky, and it was probably as hilly as a city like Jerusalem or Rome. But you see none of it today. It was all leveled, and the holes were filled in, and the hills were knocked down. So when you look down those long sort of Manhattan vistas, they're completely artificial.
You can see people, you can see the sky, you can see the river. So I think that just brings that sense of possibility.
That grid really encouraged people to invest in real estate because they knew that one day streets would be opened further north, and people did. They started acquiring real estate and building streets.
Από το 1785 ως το 1790, αυτή η πόλη ήταν η πρωτεύουσα της Αμερικής, με πληθυσμό 340.000. Σε λιγότερο από ένα αιώνα, είχε 3,4 εκατομμύρια κατοίκους.
On January 1st, 1898, the city of New York was born as we know it today. 40 separate municipal governments came together so that we could call ourselves the largest city in the world. We wanted to be a little bit bigger than London, so we converged all of these different communities.
Χαιρετίστηκε ως το μεγαλύτερο πείραμα δημοτικής διακυβέρνησης. Αν και το εγχείρημα αυτό απαιτεί ένα βαθμό ομοιογένειας, έδωσε τη δυνατότητα στα δημοτικά διαμερίσματα να διατηρήσουν τα ιδιαίτερα χαρακτηριστικά τους.
There are stereotypical personalities to each borough. Manhattan, you have the posh, stiff upper lip, phenomenally wealthy Upper East Side, simultaneous with the hip, bohemian Greenwich Village. You've got the impoverished artist of the Lower East Side with the internationally renowned multi-gazillion-dollar gallery owner of Soho 20 minutes away. Brooklyn is amazing. You've got the hipsters of Williamsburg living with the Hasidic Jews, living nearby to Bedford-Stuyvesant, one of the most important African-American communities in the entire city, second only to Harlem. Fat Man routinely says, we want out of New York City. It's a lot of people that left Brooklyn, mostly Italian and Irish. But now there's a growing community of people from Sri Lanka and from India and wealthier Southeast Asians who've gone from Manhattan's Chinatown to Brooklyn's Chinatown to Staten Island. The Bronx is the only borough that's connected to mainland America. So you've got this incredible connection to America for commerce. It's where our giant fish market is, our produce market, our meat market that feeds New York City.
Και υπάρχει και το Queens.
Queens is the most diverse county in the United States. More languages are spoken in Queens than any other place in the United States. You can get food from every part of the world there. You can walk out onto that sidewalk right now and you'll hear virtually every language known to mankind, every accent.
America at the turn of the century. Men, women, and children streaming to her shores from countries around the world. For 16 million immigrants, Ellis Island in New York Harbor was the golden door.
Η ευημερία της Νέας Υόρκης ήταν και συνεχίζει να είναι άρρηκτα συνδεδεμένη με τη μετανάστευση.
This is the most diverse place in the world, and that's because we are so welcoming to everybody.
Of course, we have problems with gentrification and segregation today in New York, but there's still this fundamental ethos of people from lots of different cultures and mindsets colliding and creating this kind of friction and energy in the city.
3,2 εκατομμύρια κάτοικοι της Νέας Υόρκης είναι μετανάστες, ιδιοκτήτες των μισών επιχειρήσεων στην πόλη, που συμβάλλουν κατά $228 εκατομμύρια στο ΑΕΠ της χώρας.
Immigration is something that New Yorkers, I think, are particularly proud of.
There's something about the synergy, the energy that you get by having all these cultures together.
We are connected to the world through our immigrants, through our food, through our theater, through all of these incredible things that make us both global and intensely provincial all at the same time.
New York at some level is a mirror and a window. It both helps us see ourselves better and helps us understand the world better. I want my city to always welcome strivers from around the world. The tired, the poor, the huddled masses, that's what's on the statue in the harbor.
Countless thousands of youngsters have thrilled to their first glimpse of her. Mounted on a pedestal of concrete and granite, her body fashioned out of metal, she is still every inch a warm, inspiring symbol of man's faith and freedom.
Το άγαλμα του λιμανιού ύψους 93 μέτρων έφτασε το 1886, δώρο της Γαλλίας για την επέτειο των 100 χρόνων της Αμερικανικής Ανεξαρτησίας. Οι 7 ακτίνες στο στέμμα συμβολίζουν τις 7 υπήρους και τους 7 ωκεανούς. Αποτελεί την οικουμενική έννοια της ελευθερίας.
It shows the ties our countries had, the abandonment of slavery, thus the chain around her ankle, the tablets of the Declaration of Independence.
Για τα εκατομμύρια των μεταναστών που ήρθαν εδώ αναζητώντας την περιπέτεια και την ευκαιρία ή την ασφάλεια μακριά από τις εστίες τους που τις αφάνισε ο πόλεμος, το άγαλμα της ελευθερίας έγινε το διαχρονικό σύμβολο της ιστορίας τους.
She has nothing to do with immigration. The Emma Lazarus poem was added in the 20th century. Give me your tired, your poor, the wretched refuse of your teeming shores. It's not original. It was added. It's one of those wonderful historic objects that through a twist of fate has become an icon.
Αντιπροσωπεύει το κέρας της αμάλθειας και των ευκαιριών, το υπόβαθρο για το αμερικάνικο όνειρο.
If you make it here, you can make it anywhere. There's a great saying. It said in the Lower East Side, it's a process of 10 years. So there's this idea, in 10 years you could go from nothing to the middle class or the upper class. What's in the DNA of New York City is opportunity.
The important thing, of course, is that the heart of the city has a booming beat, stronger than ever before. Times change, and you either change your city to fit them, or they'll change your city.
Neighborhoods in the Lower East Side in the late 19th century were literally the densest neighborhoods on planet Earth. So the business district couldn't really expand. We were kind of hemmed in. And the skyscraper fundamentally is a solution to a problem, which is we need more land. So what do? figure out a way to make land in the sky. The solution was a technological one. It was the idea of using originally iron and then steel framing to create a structure that essentially released the walls from bearing the load. And once you have this skeletal structure of iron, you could just go up.
Ο χωροταξικός σχεδιασμός εφαρμόζεται περισσότερο από έναν αιώνα μετά τον πολεοδομικό σχεδιασμό του Μανχάταν, όπου ορίζεται το σχήμα του και η κάθετη στρωματοποίησή του.
One of the things it governed was uses, where you can put commercial uses, where you can put residential, but it also governed bulk, how big a building can be and what its shape can be. And at that time, people were worried that there were skyscrapers going up and there'd be no light and air left for anybody. So it essentially took every block in New York City and assigned it a regulation that said how much land can you build in the sky? How many times can you replicate that ground plane in the sky? And that continues to exist until today.
Το Μανχάταν συνεχίζει να εξυγχρονίζεται ακόμα και κατά τη διάρκεια της Μεγάλης Ύφεσης. Το 1931 ήταν μια από τις πιο παραγωγικές χρονιές, με 32 ουρανοξύστες, μεταξύ αυτών και το Empire State Building με τους 102 ορόφους, το υψηλότερο κτίριο για 40 χρόνια. Με τόσες πολλές επιχειρήσεις, είχε δικό του ταχυδρομικό κώδικα.
The skyscraper is a cause and consequence of what I would call the sort of the urban economic imperative. It's an inevitability. It is the path to the future. The demand for urban living, the demand for working in central cities today is as strong as it's ever been. So you cannot deny that urban imperative.
Η Νέα Υόρκη ήταν προορισμένη να γίνει μια τσιμεντένια ζούγκλα, αλλά είναι και η πόλη των δέντρων, χάρη σε πρόσθετες διατάξεις που εφαρμόστηκαν από τη δεκαετία του 1960.
Many people in New York live on top of each other.
We don't have the luxury of the suburbs of, front yards, backyards.
So the idea of creating either pocket parks where they can go and sit under a tree, or a central park where they can recreate and walk or go on a boat or bicycle is really, really important.
So New York City has nearly 600 of these indoor and outdoor spaces called POPs, which stands for privately owned public spaces. And they have been built over time since the 60s through the zoning regulations, which incentivize developers to build these in exchange to build a bigger, bulkier building than otherwise the regulations allowed for them to build.
Είναι ένα αντιστάθμισμα που δεν αφήνει κανέναν ασυγκίνητο.
To really see the theater of public life, to see all of the urban life unfold in front of you every day in New York happens in our streets, our plazas, our parks. Those kinds of spaces are what makes cities so great.
Για τους κατοίκους της Νέας Υόρκης, το πάρκο που ξεπερνά κάθε προσδοκία είναι το Σέντραλ Παρκ, χαρακτηριστικό δείγμα εμπνευσμένου αστικού σχεδιασμού.
I can't imagine Manhattan without Central Park. 843 acres of green space in the middle of some of the most valuable real estate anywhere in America.
We were very smart and we put Central Park smack in the middle of this very dense Manhattan, which has really given us breathing room.
This is a place with breathing space and elbow room and music and hot dogs and innocence for visitors and New Yorkers alike. The 843 acres of green countryside called Central Park.
Αν η Νέα Υόρκη είναι το μεγάλο μήλο, τότε αυτό είναι ο πυρήνας της. Συγκεντρώνει 42 εκατομμύρια επισκέπτες κάθε χρόνο. Μεγαλύτερο από το πριγκιπάτο του Μονακό, διαθέτει μονοπάτια μήκους 93 χιλιόμετρων για τρέξιμο και 9.000 ξύλινα παγκάκια για να παίρνουν μια ανάσα οι επισκέπτες.
When you go to Central Park, there are these outcroppings of rock, Manhattan schist, which goes just miles into the earth. And Manhattan schist is incredibly hard to dynamite, especially in the 19th century.
New York is built on the rock of Manhattan Island, and that means blasting.
It was cost prohibitive to remove it to build buildings. By converting it to park space and enhancing the property value of the four sides of the park, we made a democratic space for people of all ethnic and economic backgrounds to mingle in nature.
Με το πέρασμα των χρόνων, αυτός ο χώρος πρασίνου που έσφιζε από ζωή άρχισε να βιώνει το δικό του χειμώνα της εγκατάλειψης.
Central Park has always been at the mercy of city budgets. Recession and high inflation.
The city itself was pretty broke in the mid-20th century.
Ήταν πλέον ένα απομεινάριο του παρελθόντος, όπου κυριαρχούσε η παρανομία και ο κίνδυνος.
By all means run in the park, preferably by day.
Μέσα σε λίγες δεκαετίες, το καμάρι της χώρας μετατράπηκε σε εθνικό όντως.
So Central Park and other parks in the latter part of the 20th century figured out a model where they could actually bring private investment in. And now much of Central Park is actually privately operated by a conservancy. It's fantastic.
The Central Park Conservancy have done a spectacular job of bringing private money to restore the park for public use.
The city still gives it some money and still oversees it, but the biggest parks in New York, including Prospect Park and others, are now operated privately.
Από θαμπό πετράδι, το Σέντραλ Παρκ ανακτά και πάλι τη λάμψη του και γίνεται πιο εντυπωσιακό από πριν. Με τον τρόπο του συμβάλλει ώστε να γίνει η πόλη πιο βιώσιμη.
To me, the term livability, it's a way of saying it's a city for people, or that it's designed with people in mind. It's something that makes our everyday life more complete. One of the things that is really interesting about New York is that you get so many characters of neighborhoods. And so you can create your own story.
It's village living. If you can create a city where most people can walk within 15-20 minutes to achieve 80% of their needs, drop their kid off to school, get fresh groceries, get their mother health care, that's a wonderful way to live.
It's really about thinking about mixed use in a productive way.
Δημιουργούνται γειτονιές, όπου οι κάτοικοι μπορούν να δουλεύουν αλλά και να παίζουν.
And what that means is you're sort of bringing the mountain to Muhammad, right? You're actually starting to build places of work closer to more affordable neighborhoods. With technology, we're seeing the multinodal city really flourish. This has always been true in places like London and the San Francisco Bay Area, many nodes. But in New York now, you know, we're designing an office building on the waterfront in Brooklyn where you never ever would have seen an office building even 10 years ago.
This dynamic island of stone and steel and people continues to change its face as the building boom goes on. It cannot fail to inspire a sense of awe at its mighty symmetry.
The waterfront used to be a place where industry happened, but as the shipping industry changed and those uses went to other places in the region, we've reclaimed our waterfront and made them parks and housing and jobs.
Repurposing public spaces is a big movement, definitely has taken the forefront in a lot of cities these days.
And most of the global cities are either on rivers or on coastlines.
New York City has more shoreline and access to water than any other city in the Americas.
Our harbor defines us, our waterfront defines us. It's our greatest natural asset and we're reclaiming it and learning to live better with it.
I think New York City has done a wonderful job of repurposing its waterfront. And so what you'll see now is a ribbon of parks right the way around Manhattan. Took us till this century to figure out that you want to have parks around the rim of water when you don't need to use it for commercial uses. So that's one thing that I think New York really can bring to other global cities.
Now that the water is so much cleaner than it was, the shad are swimming up the Hudson again as they haven't for decades.
We now have a new New York City ferry system that's connecting the 5 boroughs.
It's really tapping and using its resources in different ways and sort of reimagining how to use them. That also relates to the whole idea of the High Line. The High Line was something that was slated to be taken down.
Used to be for freight in the meatpacking district, and it became this derelict structure over time. Through advocates and through city support, they were able to save that structure and transform it into this green ribbon really in the sky.
Όταν άνοιξε το 2009, το High Line ήταν φόρος τιμής στη συνεργασία τέχνης και φύσης, με 8 εκατομμύρια επισκέπτες το χρόνο.
It's definitely a unique experience compared to other open spaces because you're elevated. So your vantage point of the city is a very different one than you see from at ground level on parks and plazas.
It has really brought another perspective about what public space can be in New York.
It's a gem that we almost lost or didn't have in New York City.
Τα πάρκα για τους Νεοϊορκέζους είναι αντίδοτο σε αυτό το χάος. Από τους πιο πολυσύχναστους δρόμους σε όλο τον κόσμο, περίπου 32.000 χιλιόμετρα αυτοκινητόδρομου συνδέουν τους 5 δήμους της Νέας Υόρκης με πάνω από 40.000 διασταυρώσεις, 14.000 θέσεις στάθμευσης, 11.400 φωτεινούς σηματοδότες και 1 εκατομμύριο πινακίδες.
New York City is a city of congestion, and there's a seafaring captain who said he'd rather cross the Atlantic in a squall than Broadway at noon.
Το μποτιλιάρισμα είναι ο εφιάλτης κάθε οδηγού, κάτι που η κυβέρνηση προτίθεται να βελτιώσει με την επιβολή ενός αμφιλεγόμενου φόρου.
The police department is installing technology to scan and photograph the license plates of all vehicles coming onto the island.
Μετά το 2021, για να οδηγήσεις στο Μανχάταν πέρα από την 60η λεωφόρο, πληρώνεις 12 με 14 δολάρια φόρο.
We've seen such rapid changes in the last 10 years that we did not see in over 100 years. And there are changes in so many directions at once. It's the micro deliveries, it's the bike share, pedestrian plazas, scooters, Uber, Lyft came on the scene. And we saw traffic speeds all of a sudden drop from that 6, 7.5 miles an hour to 4.5, 5 miles an hour. It's like a scene out of Network screaming out their windows, I'm mad as hell. Do something about it.
Η εξέβρεση λύσης ήταν ευθύνη αποκλειστικά του κράτους, υπόθεση που θα του χάριζε μεγάλη αξιοπιστία.
Cities plus math plus science equals traffic.
America still has a percentage of cars to the population far exceeding any other country, which makes her problems just that much more complicated. So what a boom this highway will be to the average man in New York, who is also the average motorist.
40 years ago, in 1980, there was a transit strike, and I said the grid could lock up. We could have gridlock. The word soon became one word, and I became the father of gridlock. I get chills up my spine every time I hear a president of the United States or some leaders in Europe use the word gridlock.
Σε προηγούμενη ζωή, ο εμπνευστής του συγκεκριμένου σχεδίου θα πρέπει να ήταν οδηγός ταξί.
Back in the 50s, I would liken a cab driver in New York to a bartender. You had conversations with your cab driver. Your cab driver gave you advice on life.
Εκείνα τα χρόνια οι άδειες για ταξί ήταν ελάχιστες και κόστιζαν μια περιουσία.
The medallion at the beginning of the decade, 2010, was exceeding $1 million.
Οι υπηρεσίες κοινής ωφέλειας βλέπουν τελευταία την αξία τους να πέφτει κατακόρυφα.
So these people's livelihoods were destroyed almost overnight. Uber and Lyft and others have destroyed particularly taxi systems. So cities should have their eyes wide open and prepare for that and have good alternatives, and don't abandon your transit systems and don't abandon your taxi cab industry.
Η αποσυμφόρηση κατά πολλούς θα επιτευχθεί όταν η πόλη μετακινηθεί προς τα κάτω.
This subway was never designed to accommodate a regional population of 20 million people.
Really, at this point, the system should probably be twice as big as it is, but it has only opened about 2 or 3 new stations in the last 30 years.
Ακόμα και έτσι όμως πρόκειται για ένα τεράστιο έργο υποδομής. 472 συνολικά σταθμοί συνδέονται μεταξύ τους με 416 χιλιόμετρα σιδηροδρομικών γραμμών που μεταφέρουν περίπου 1,6 δισεκατομμύριο επιβάτες το χρόνο.
This city would not exist without its subway. The subway is what allows us to be New York City, to have such high density living.
There are many cities around the world that have built metros, and yet they're for a certain class of people.
The best transit systems are not the transit systems built for the poor. The best are the transit systems built for everybody.
Το μετρό χρειάζεται καλύτερη πρόσβαση, καλύτερο φωτισμό, καλύτερα βαγόνια. Ο Δήμος σκοπεύει να ολοκληρώσει την αναβάθμισή του με τους φόρους από το μποτιλιάρισμα.
Just think about how a good subway system allowed us to expand, allowed people to have better lives for their families. They didn't have to live literally next door.
Congestion pricing will take $1 billion a year. It has to raise $1 billion a year that goes right into transit. That $1 billion, when it's bonded, turns into $15 billion. And we're hoping for $100 billion over the next decade, and that we will have a wonderful system.
Δεν είναι μόνο ο υπόγειος σιδηρόδρομος που απλώνει υπόγεια τα πλοκάμια του. Υπάρχουν πολλά ακόμα που διεκδικούν την κρυμμένη ακίνητη περιουσία.
It's really a spaghetti-like grouping of pipes under there, which to most people are completely unknowable. Some of them are telecom, some of them are power, some of them are water, and they all lie at various depths. Sometimes they're very near the street, and sometimes they're further down. And those are all separate from the actual subway.
Υπάρχουν καλώδια τηλεπικοινωνιών 80.000 χιλιόμετρων. Αρκετή ηλεκτρική ενέργεια για τη μισή διαδρομή ως το φεγγάρι και 12.000 σωλήνες για το αποχετευτικό δίκτυο.
So New York City, like many northeastern cities in the United States, has a combined sewer system.
If you were to build a city today, you would separate out your stormwater and your sanitary sewage, your domestic sewerage. But back then, they didn't really think about that.
And that has a lot of challenges when there's a particularly high-intensity rainstorm. Thinking about rain, coastal storms, and sea level rise, there's more, direct flooding right into the river. So we've been investing billions of dollars in upgrading that system and reducing those overflows into the harbor. One of the great strategies that we've been doing is green infrastructure and bioswales and tree pits and other means of collecting stormwater. So it's diverting it from the sewer system and not causing those overflows. Instead of digging a hole and putting a pipe in and having that define your sewer system, we're using natural flow, overland, stream systems, retention basins that's helping to reduce flooding in certain neighborhoods, but also naturally filtering contaminants as well as an alternative to the traditional sewer systems.
Υπάρχει ο μύθος για τους αλιγάτορες που καραδοκούν στους υπονόμους της Νέας Υόρκης. Το πιθανότερο όμως είναι να συναντήσεις εδώ αυτό το ζωάκι με τα γουρλωτά μάτια.
Rats are denizens of sewers the world over. We are certainly in New York a ratropolis.
I would never want to live on the bottom floor of an apartment in New York because I've heard that your rat problem is ridiculous.
We allowed ships in and we never really thought about rats being on those ships. Where would a rat want to live in a city? All around the world, sewers and rats go hand in hand. It's pitch black, of course, down in the sewer. They don't need much light. Their world is all about feeling and touching and smelling.
Και φυσικά τρώνε.
You take this simple litter basket on the street that nobody pays any attention to. But the fact of the matter is, if we don't choose a litter basket style correctly all night long, they will be feeding the rats. So here in New York City, we have a basket called the Big Belly. And we took the old litter baskets out, we put the new litter baskets in, and the rats left the park. It was that successful. It was no more food. Simple.
Ο αριθμός των αρουραίων υπολογίζεται στα 2 εκατομμύρια, μπορεί 5 ή και 10.
They're multiplying too fast for the city to do anything. They could take over if they wanted to. I mean, it's sickening. It's ridiculous.
Rats are public health menaces, without a doubt, and we can't take that lightly.
Το πιο πρόσφατο όπλο στον πόλεμο κατά των αρουραίων είναι αισθητήρες που από μακριά εντοπίζουν την παρουσία τους και στοχεύουν στην εξόντωσή τους.
But that's not going to be enough either. So, to get really rid of the rats, we're going to have increased sanitation from the city itself.
Δεν είναι και λίγο, ακόμα και για τη μεγαλύτερη εταιρεία διαχείρισης αποβλήτων στον κόσμο.
The trash capital of the nation is New York City. The men and machinery are beaten almost before they begin the cleanup job, and every 24 hours another 30,000 tons hits the pavement. New York's title is safe, the garbage capital of the world.
The worst piece of infrastructure in New York is our waste management system, meaning garbage.
Your garbage goes out anytime after 4 p.m. and is generally collected before 7 a.m. the next morning. So if you're walking around in an area that has a lot of residential, tall buildings, after 4 p.m. you will often see bags of garbage that are waiting to be collected. You're talking about 25-30,000 tons of waste each day.
Ο μέσος κάτοικος της Νέας Υόρκης βγάζει 11 κιλά απορριμμάτων την εβδομάδα, 14 δηλαδή εκατομμύρια τόνοι τον χρόνο. Η διαχείρισή τους στοιχίζει στην πόλη $2,3 δισεκατομμύρια το χρόνο.
We just generate way too much trash. If we started composting, you'd see an enormous reduction in the amount of solid waste the city creates. We need to become a circular city where the inputs and the outputs start matching each other. We're just way behind the 8 ball on this.
We've set a target to get ourselves to a zero waste commitment by 2030, which means we need to be diverting all of that waste out of landfills. That means pulling out all the recyclable material and getting that to marketplace in a different way.
Η απειλή των σκουπιδιών δεν θα εξαφανιστεί σύντομα εδώ. Η αλήθεια όμως είναι ότι η πόλη μόνο επένους έχει δεχτεί για τον τρόπο διαχείρισης των αποβλήτων και διανομής του νερού.
New York City made a dramatic investment in the future by building the aqueduct system, building the reservoirs in upstate, and securing New York City's water future.
New York has an amazing system of water, and it gets its water from north of the city, from 3 separate reservoir systems that bring water down into holding tanks, and it's delivered through tunnels to individual homes and businesses.
Καθημερινά μπαίνουν στο σύστημα 4,9 δισεκατομμύρια λίτρα νερού. Το 97% φτάνει στην πόλη χάρη σε ένα ευφυές σύστημα υδραγωγείων που θα ζήλευαν ακόμα και οι Ρωμαίοι.
Most of it still comes to the city unfiltered. It's that clean.
Για να εξασφαλίσει τη λειτουργία του συστήματος για άλλο 1 αιώνα τουλάχιστον, η πόλη επενδύει σε μια προληπτική αναβάθμιση.
This was the moment when Sandy struck. 90-mile-an-hour winds slicing through New York's streets.
Το 2012, ο τυφώνας Σάντι αποκάλυψε τα τροτά σημεία της Νέας Υόρκης, καθώς βρέθηκε αντιμέτωπη με την κλιματική αλλαγή.
Hurricanes don't often sweep through here. This one took the Atlantic in with it.
New York City lowered my hand underwater.
And Hurricane Sandy was the worst natural disaster we've ever faced. $19 billion in damages, 44 lives lost across the city.
Nobody was prepared for it. Now we're trying to figure out how can we prepare for the next one.
Don't mess with Mother Nature, that's correct. Don't mess with Mother Nature.
The city has been thinking about big problems for its entire history. But only recently have we really begun to do that in a comprehensive way in the mayor's office, thinking about the challenges that we face and where we want to go. We are divesting our pension funds from fossil fuels. We have sued big oil for the damages that we've seen here in New York City. All of that is really a comprehensive climate strategy that we think other cities should undertake as well. We're a city that's been built up over decades and centuries, and so a lot of our infrastructure is aging and needs to be replaced. Whether it's our sewer and our wastewater system, whether it's our transportation network, the transit system and the subways, all of it is being rethought in this era of climate change, and we have a lot of work ahead of us to really adapt that infrastructure for the future.
Φαίνεται ότι έχουν δοθεί πολλά χρήματα για να μπουν καινούργιοι σωλήνες. Αλλά αυτό μάλλον δεν ήταν πάντα πρόβλημα για την πόλη που δεν κοιμάται ποτέ.
Rising out of the East River, the famous New York skyline, a city with a budget bigger than many countries. Yet incredibly, despite all its wealth, New York, within a matter of weeks, may be bankrupt.
One of the difficulties of the 1970s is that large corporations were drawn to Connecticut and New Jersey, and we lost a lot of our corporate tax base. New York's apple, if you will, was beginning to rot.
And I find no substantial sentiment to bail out New York City.
500.000 θέσεις εργασίας εξαφανίστηκαν. Στα μέσα της δεκαετίας, 1 εκατομμύριο εργαζόμενοι ζούσαν από το Ταμείο Ανεργίας.
The city became, if you will, addicted to borrowing money from Wall Street to cover its operating expenses.
Το 1975 η πόλη ήταν στα πρόθυρα χρεοκοπίας, αδυνατώντας να πληρώσει λειτουργικά έξοδα ή να πάρει ένα δάνειο.
If the city declared bankruptcy, it would have been a nightmare.
Με χρέος 11 δισεκατομμύρια δολάρια, αναγκάστηκε να απολύσει το 16% των εργαζομένων στον Δήμο.
Policing and sanitation took a big hit as a result.
Most Americans say that's the trouble with New York. They know how to spend money, but not how to handle it.
Crime rates and the economy go hand in hand, and which one comes first depends on the time.
Το 1975 αναφέρθηκαν 581.247 υποθέσεις σοβαρών εγκλημάτων. Οι φόνοι υπερδιπλασιάστηκαν, βιασμοί και ληστείες τριπλασιάστηκαν σε μια δεκαετία, ενώ οι διαρρήξεις δεκαπλασιάστηκαν. Το Μπράιαν Παρκ ήταν μια υπαίθρια αγορά ναρκωτικών. Το Grand Central μάζευε όλα τα αποβράσματα και κανένας δεν χρησιμοποιούσε το μετρό με το φόβο των ληστειών.
New York is really the center of our civilization. What we need to do is revive New York City.
New York is a 24-hour, vibrant, rich city. It may have more crime victims than Wyoming has people, but as they'd say here, who wants to live in Wyoming?
When Giuliani came about in the mid-90s with ideas about how to restore order and maintenance to society, strategies in mind. CompStat was a way to bring accountability back to local law enforcement executives at the precinct level, as opposed to having strategies from top down.
Ξαφνικά η αστυνομία της Νέας Υόρκης μπορούσε να αντιδράσει άμεσα σε εγκληματικές ενέργειες.
So you didn't have to wait till the end of the month to figure out what the crime trend is. Somebody at one police plaza read that you had a crime spike overnight. You didn't wait till it became a trend. You addressed it the next day. And we made decisions in policing based on that data. How we enforced, where we enforced, what techniques we used.
Άλλη μια καινοτομία του Δημάρχου Giuliani ήταν ότι πλέον η αστυνομία θα λειτουργούσε σαν ένα αντί πολλά τμήματα.
It wasn't always that way, right? The municipal police, and they had regional police throughout the boroughs, and they had housing authority police, transit police. That went away. Administrations were merged, so you didn't have different chiefs with different goals.
Αυτή τη στιγμή η πρόληψη των εγκλημάτων συνέφερε τους πάντες. Giuliani και Bratton θεώρησαν λογική τη σύμπραξη όλων.
Crime prevention through environmental design was actually adopted by a lot of planning organizations, government planning, real estate planners.
Private stakeholders started taking actions to improve the environments that they were responsible for.
Ο φωτισμός έκανε δρόμους και πάρκα πιο ασφαλή. Μπήκαν θάμνοι αντί για κάγκελα. Η κατάσταση βελτιωνόταν και η Νέα Υόρκη κέρδιζε ξανά το κοινό της.
I don't think you can compare NYPD to any police department in the United States. There was a point where homicides in New York City topped 2,400. I think last year was under 300. That's a huge difference in crime rates. When crime goes down, we see real estate values go up. When real estate values go up, then governments see revenue stream.
Η Νέα Υόρκη κατάφερε από τις πιο κακόφημες και επικίνδυνες πόλεις της Αμερικής να γίνει μια από τις ασφαλέστερες στον κόσμο. Η οικονομία βελτιώθηκε και ο τουρισμός σημείωσε μια εκρηκτική άνοδο.
The I Love New York campaign, New York as the Big Apple. The idea that you can come here and fit this beautiful red object in your hand, take a bite out of it, and it's tart and sweet and savory all at the same time was an utterly brilliant campaign.
Over 60 million tourists came to New York City in the last year. 60 million people.
We're hosting people from all over the world constantly, and that's a good influence, I think.
So for every resident, there are 3 tourists. I mean, that's how exciting New York is to people in the 21st century.
Big parts of New York, like Broadway theater, would die without tourism.
Tourism is absolutely crucial. It's one of the most important industries in New York. It is employing hundreds of thousands of people, if not more. There will always be tourists who come to a city like New York to shop. There'll always be tourists that will come to a city because they want the Michelin 3-star restaurant experience. But there are also a number of tourists who want to come to a place to just experience that place.
Και στην κορυφή της λίστας τους η Times Square.
What do tourists come to see? They come to see light and action, and so that's what the zoning code really caters to. You can see how much real estate has been devoted to them. If you look, it's now practically all pedestrianized for them.
Τα κτίρια γύρω από την πλατεία πρέπει να είναι πολύ καλά φωτισμένα με φώτα τελευταίας τεχνολογίας. Το κόστος τους ανέρχεται σε $24,713 ημερησίως. Τα φώτα είναι τόσο δυνατά που μπορούν να τα διακρίνουν ακόμα και οι αστροναύτες από το διάστημα.
You can pay me any amount of money to go there on New Year's Eve. I've had the good fortune to be there once and never again.
Μετά τα γεγονότα της 11ης Σεπτεμβρίου, η Νέα Υόρκη ήταν φυσικά και συναισθηματικά διαλυμένη.
The first tower came down. It stayed a shock, not just those on the ground, but America watching from televisions or from their windows and seeing what was happening.
We were all very concerned about the state of the city after 9/11. We didn't know how many attacks were going to come, and yet we rebounded extraordinarily.
The most amazing thing that I saw after that moment was how New Yorkers came together to help each other. Immediately, the lines at the hospital of people wanting to give blood. Process what happened, deal with the aftermath, and support each other.
It affected many New Yorkers, I think most, with a sense of togetherness, community, resolve, and resistance to that type of violence.
New York City has put itself on a brand new trajectory, and we have figured out how to recover from that event and to really be stronger in the face of the kinds of threats that we know are coming.
The struggle in the post-9/11 world has been how to create a secure city that's still a public city. And, I think we've gotten there.
The city has really gone back to its normal cadence and its normal rhythm.
We're all trying to figure out how do you create a city that's safe and is resilient in the face of terrorism, but also something that still feels like a city, that feels like, the place you wanted to come to and not a fortress.
Το Παγκόσμιο Κέντρο Εμπορίου και το κτίριο Oculus, που φιλοξενεί και σταθμό και μετρό, συνέβαλαν στην επίτευξη του στόχου. Ο σχεδιασμός του παραπέμπει σε ένα πουλί που πετάει από τα χέρια ενός παιδιού και δίνει μια αίσθηση ελπίδας στον τόπο της τραγωδίας. Ένα μνημείο που συμβολίζει την αναγέννηση της πόλης και των κατοίκων της.
The Oculus has been a demonstration that we can do inspiring places for infrastructure in New York. We actually connected that place that used to feel very insular back into the city. And you can go and have lunch, and you can go and remember, and you can go and reflect about life in the city. It's such a striking place. It's a place of innovation. And I think that that's what the original World Trade Center was, but also a place now of remembrance and a place that feels part of the city and that everyone has access to.
Η Νέα Υόρκη συνεχίζει να ξεχωρίζει, δείχνοντας σε όλο τον κόσμο πώς μπορεί να τα καταφέρει. Ενωμένοι όλοι σαν μια γροθιά, βρίσκουν λύσεις που μπορεί να βοηθήσουν όλους μας.
The future is working with each other, working in teams, developing new ideas.
We can't just sit back and wait to see what the trend is going to be. We need to be out in front helping drive that trend.
It's a bit like watching the sausage being made. The outcome is going to be fine. You just don't want to see what goes into it.
human beings have a natural desire actually to be with one another and learn from one another and live together. And I think cities are really the outcome of that desire.
So whether that's new business opportunities, whether that's new ways of collaborating, whether that's the way that we bring ideas all across the globe and launch them out back across the globe, it's because we're all so close together and interacting so often and so much that makes this such a dynamic place to be.